I'll look directly at you and also all of you. There's a dynamic in speaking and communicating where you feel like you shouldn't have notes. And I could talk about science attached to it and everything like that, but just to be simple, there's nothing wrong with having notes. There is a problem with not engaging with your audience. So if your notes prevent you from effectively engaging with your audience, know your notes better and then teach them. There's also, off the cuff and more spontaneous communication styles can be good, but it's not always the right way to do things. I am not as effective as I'd like to be in utilizing notes when I use them, or as effective at the spontaneous style when I do that. But figure out what works effectively for you, and you do you, boo-boo, because in the end, you're different than everybody else. And so if you look at somebody who has a full, long life of experiences and training and teaching, or just various thought processes toward things, and they do communication one way, and you try to mimic that, you're never gonna do what they do anyways. Figure out what works most effectively for you. And I'll tell you this, if you're not using notes and you can communicate, but you don't share any effective content, I'm gonna be wondering where the notes are. If you use notes and you share content, but you're ineffective at communicating with me or somebody sitting in the room, I'm gonna be wondering why you didn't study your notes more or get it up here to where you didn't even have to use notes. I used to tell worship leaders and vocalists when I would lead worship, and then when I just saw them and felt like I needed to tell them this, if you just close your eyes the whole time and never look at the room, your ability to connect is going to be diminished. I'm not saying you should never close your eyes, but when you're on stage, it's no longer about you, it's about everyone in the room. And so anytime you're communicating, you've already thought about this. This isn't for you anymore. It might be beneficial for you, but you're communicating to a group of people, so think from their perspective. All right, I'll move on. I'm going to talk about some of my possible topics really quickly. What time is it? 6:17. We're good on time. Good job, everybody. Good job, everybody. Good job for being here, Anna. Y'all should give her a hand because she showed up this week. Just kidding, Anna. Kinda. I've been savage all week with her because she missed last week in her first week. But you know what? 3 out of 5 is better than 0 out of 5. I wouldn't do this with everybody, but anyways. Okay, so if you can open your Bibles to the chapters we're going to be in, that would be dope. (25) through 28 is what we were. It's starting to run together, isn't it, guys? Especially first, second Kings and second Chronicles is starting to run together, isn't it? Is it Uzziah, Ahaziah? Is it Joash, Jehoash? Is it all these people have similar names at similar time periods? It almost makes you think that they can't figure out who did what. And maybe that's the case. Oh, stressful. This is the Bible. It's God inspired, God breathed, useful for teaching in all things pertaining to righteousness. But it's still a historical record with different kings who liked and didn't like each other, and people who wanted to remember them in specific ways. This is a historical document that God uses daily to bless us and draw us near to himself. But that doesn't mean humans didn't put it together. I want to just diminish this desire in us to think that everything in the Bible is perfect. I want to diminish the desire in us that says 1st, 2nd Chronicles has to effectively and with 100% objective historical accuracy. I don't mean it's not historically accurate. I mean objectively. This is clearly not objective literature. It's not objective. You can see the difference between 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles. It's not objective. God is using the hands of imperfect people to construct something that blesses us today. I don't fully understand how the Spirit works to guide the text into my brain in such a way that it blesses me. And I know when I look at this that there appear to be inconsistencies, but those historical or potential or the things I perceive as inconsistencies are not consistent in the intent that God desires for my life. Let me be clear. I believe the word of God is inerrant in every aspect of the word. But I also believe the humans that put it together are imperfect. And again, I'll say this again, this is doctrine of inerrancy. God supernaturally used human hands to put a godly product together to inspire us toward him. And this does it. It blesses me every single day when I'm reading it. That's why we're going through 1st, 2nd Chronicles. But again, when you look at 1st, 2nd Kings and 1st, 2nd Chronicles, and you see that they're saying different things, don't stress out. Don't stress out about it. This is, I believe historically some way they come together, but I think we're getting small perspectives from the people who were at 1st, 2nd Kings. I'm sure there are other documents that have fallen into the historical, the recesses of history, and we'll never see, but they would have been great perspectives that would have been helpful for us. Okay. So just when you're reading the Bible, don't let the people who read Genesis and say, see, it doesn't say anything about evolution, or it doesn't say anything about science here, and clearly science is effective. Who cares? I mean, like, Genesis was about the people of God in a relationship with God. It wasn't about every scientific detail. I always ask people, I say, man, if God wanted to include all the scientific details, he might have waited until we had scientific knowledge. But luckily he didn't, and we have the Bible. Sorry, I just entered into a bunch of topics we probably shouldn't talk about at a big public level like this. But I just want you to stop being scared when the atheist comes up to you and says, did you know this about the Bible? You do now. Like, it's okay. It's okay. All right. So in the chapters we covered this week, was it good to only have like 3 chapters essentially? Well, 4, yeah, 26, 3 chapters. I thought it was pretty dope. It was enjoyable. There's a lot of good content in it. The reason I only did 3 this week and I did like 9 next week is because Hezekiah is like super cool. And oh my gosh, Josiah, like there are a couple big kings. You're gonna have a lot of content next week. I want to challenge you. Don't do like I said last week, don't do the whole this is good, it's really good. Leaders should honor God, follow God, but find something unique, find something super unique over the next couple of weeks, because Hezekiah and Josiah, great kings to pull from. All right, so let's jump into this. I put possible topics. If you're not open into your week 4 download, go ahead and open into it, every single person, even in here, because we're gonna have an activity in a second. Gosh, I didn't sleep well last night. So just ignore the fact that I brought some theological heavy hitters right at the front of it without enough time to actually cover it. But at least I'm not cussing or something. All right, so while you're doing that, first one I put is leaders go 110%. Amaziah was half-hearted. And by half-hearted, what it says in chapter 25, verse 2, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, yet not with a whole heart. I think that verse right there could possibly be emblematic of every single king with the exception of a couple. That's what I thought was interesting about Uzziah is, man, all of his life for the most part was pretty solid. I mean, the way they talk about Uzziah is almost as if he's like getting up to Solomon level and he's expanding fame and all this other stuff. And Solomon even screwed up near the end there. 2nd Chronicles doesn't tell us about it. Kings does. But like, what did Uzziah do differently than Solomon? I don't see a whole lot of difference other than we don't have as long of a historical record. And so when I see all the kings at some level, either it was pride or it was half-heartedness or it was an unwillingness to persevere in certain areas, that's what I see in 2nd Chronicles. So we're going to talk about that probably. We're definitely going to talk about that a little bit today. All right, second one, leaders don't flake. Leaders don't flake. And this is where Amaziah goes and fights the Edomites, wins, and starts bringing some of their gods back and worshiping them as well. Uh, Third one, pretty proud about this one, the way that I talked about it, but that's just more of a creative, poetic thing. I like it. I put leaders calibrate wins instead of celebrate wins. This is kind of where Amaziah comes in, and he is interacting with the king of Israel at the time. And I don't know the full extent of this story, but there's a quote in here that is also in Second Kings. And sorry, I'm pulling it up right. All right, cool. So in verse 18 of chapter 25, it says, and Joash, king of Israel, sent word to Amaziah, king of Judah. And this is the quote that is both in Second Chronicles and Second Kings. A thistle on Lebanon sent to a cedar on Lebanon, saying, give your daughter to my son for a wife, and a wild beast of Lebanon passed by and trampled down the thistle. You say, see, I have struck down Edom, and your heart has lifted you up in boastfulness. But now stay at home. Why should you provoke trouble that you fall, you and Judah with you? And then later on, it says Amaziah would not listen because he was prideful. He went up against the king of Israel. And then Joash, the king of Israel, captured Amaziah, king of Judah. So this is where he won with Edom, got super cocky. And it's good to celebrate the wins that you have in leadership or in any other area. You celebrate them. But then at some point, you got to calibrate and recognize that there are external circumstances that were affecting your success. It wasn't you. Just like Pastor Scott over here was saying, just like Scott was saying, like, don't let pride lift you up, because the reality is God is the one who can lift up and push down. And so there's that aspect, that God is the one who develops us, blesses us with victories, and we got to give him credit for it. You can still celebrate, but you gotta recalibrate afterwards so you can recognize, hey, like sometimes when I come up here and have a good sermon, or I think it's a good sermon, and then I watch it and I always get, like, me watching a sermon after doing a sermon is recalibration. So I felt good. And also on the other end, most of my sermons, I come down off the stage and I'm like, that sucked, Hannah. And she's like, oh, it's not good. But she says it's good every week. And so I only trust her to a certain extent, but I receive it every single week. And then I go watch it and I recalibrate. Oh, it's better than I thought it was. It is important after a win or a loss to come back and recalibrate. So calibrate your wins. Don't be like Amaziah, who wins against Edom and then he decides he's going to go up against, I think it was something like, what, 10,000 people? They captured 10,000 alive and they struck down 10,000. So it's 20,000 people. But then they go up, he tries to go up against Joash in Israel. And all I got to say is it's bigger than Edom at the time in history. And so just don't be so prideful. Be really, really objective in the way that you look at your wins and your losses. Leaders don't poke the bear. Again, Amaziah, he gives us a lot of bad examples. Leaders are complex. This is kind of the bigger picture. Like, all of these leaders are complex. You're complex. I'm complex. Why do I identify with villains these days in Marvel Cinematic Universe better than I used to? Well, because the villains I can identify with a little bit more effectively. One of the best villains of all time, at least people would say in film, is the main character in a movie called There Will Be Blood. It's a movie about an oil baron. And the entire life is like you identifying with him and wanting him to be a good person, but he's slowly devolving into a bad person, but you understand why. That's people. We are complex. Leaders are also complex. Most people can't look at me and say, here's how Matt thinks. Why? Because I'm crazy. I don't make sense. And nobody is completely simple. Remember that. Remember that. It's a good thing to remember when you're looking at your leaders, and if you have employees or people that you're leading. Everyone's complex and they have a variety of external and internal things going into why they do what they do. But leaders are infamous, famous, and inconspicuous. I just put that because I wanted it to end in OUS, but I thought it was cohesive with what the text is saying. Amaziah was infamous for a lot of the bad things he did. Uzziah was famous for a lot of the good things he did. And then when you go to Jotham, that is the only one of those three who, like, did y'all notice that with Jotham? What did he do bad? Even in Second Kings, I look, he didn't do anything bad. He gets like barely a decent, he didn't even get a decent sized chapter. His whole life was great. He followed the Lord. Here's what it says about Jotham. It says he was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. Now, that's not as long as Uzziah. I mean, so give Uzziah some credit. He had to go 52 years and not screw up. His mother's name was Jerusha, daughter of Zadok, assuming that Zadok, the high priest, so it's a priestly line. So there's some significance there. And he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, according to all that his father Uzziah had done, except that he didn't enter the temple and get cocky and do things he shouldn't have done. So he did everything good that Uzziah did, didn't do the bad thing Uzziah did, but the people still followed corrupt practices. Now, this isn't a stain on his kingdom. It just means he didn't radically shift everything, because they're already foreshadowing the reigns of Hezekiah and Josiah, who would make significant reforms for the Lord and for the law. And he says he built the upper gate, the house of the Lord. He did some building on the wall of Ophel. He built cities in the hill country of Judah, forts and towers on the wooded hills. He fought with the king of the Ammonites and prevailed. So he won battles. And the Ammonites gave him that year 100 talents of silver and 10,000 cores of wheat, meaning the Ammonites actually had to pay him tribute because he beat them consistently. So Jotham became mighty because he ordered his ways before the Lord. Now the rest of the acts of Jotham. That's all he gets. I put some leaders are inconspicuous. It might be a good thing that you don't hear a lot about them. The stuff you hear a lot about in Second Chronicles is not all the amazing things that they did. It's the infamous and like ridiculous things that they did. And so I live my life so often wanting to be a big deal. And God's been teaching me lately, why don't you just be consistent? Why don't you just be a good dad? Why don't you just be a good leader, and with everything that you touch, multiply it and let me handle the other stuff. That's what God's constantly teaching me. I mean, wouldn't you rather take literally a paragraph in Second Chronicles than 2 to 4 chapters with all the stuff that we hear about when they had that long in Second Chronicles? It's just something to think about, because in the end, our eternity, and in the scheme of eternity, like this life is not that big of a deal. So focus on being who God's called you to be, not necessarily something different than that. Leaders speak truth to power. This is where the heads of the sons of Ephraim come in and deal with Ahaz. And they just speak truth to power. I don't want to talk any further about that. Leaders listen to advice, but they're not fickle. King Ahaz, obviously very fickle, not someone who we want to look at as a great example. And then we're going to jump into Hezekiah next week. Here's what I want you to do. It says activity/group interaction, grit quiz on your on the Google Doc. I want to take 5 minutes. If it won't even take that long. I want everybody to take this quiz. It's only 10 quick questions. I want you to be honest. This is not helpful if you're not honest, just like any other personality profile test. And it's basic. It may not reveal too much to you, but this will be fun. Everybody take it right now. Yeah. Oh, you're not on that? If someone's got that document, oh, I'll text it to you. Oh, thanks for airdropping it to him. I know. Just like in high school, once you're done, look up. Make sure you keep your score up there, though. Huh? It's oh, wrong document. The download. You can get to the download in that document. Yeah, you can get to the download in that document. So sorry. Sorry, hold on. Get off that. There we go. All right. How many of you got a 5? Raise your hand if you got a 5. Raise your hand if you got a 4 or above. 4 or above. Raise your hand if you got a 3 or above. Raise your hand if you got a 3 or below. You got to do it. Raise your hand if you got a 3 or below. So I think there are some people who didn't vote. There we go, Frank. There we go. And then all the other people that I can't tell, feel free to type it into the chat. I'm not going to look at it. But so that is the grit scale. Again, it was developed by a person, so there's obvious subjectivity to it to an extent. But the goal of that is for you to be honest and do a self-assessment on your grit. Today, I want to talk the idea of grit, that leaders have grit. This isn't new information if you think new information is within the past 2 to 3 years. But there's a book written by a lady named Angela Duckworth in about 2013, I believe. That's when she was circulating on TED Talks and stuff. So between 2010, 2013, she wrote a book called Grit. And what she did was she looked back at a bunch of different examples and did plenty of research and study into what made people successful. So every leadership book, like people read leadership books because they want to be either successful or at least perceived as successful. And so people make a lot of money on books when they start talking about effective predictors for success. So obviously she was just trying to make money on a book and be successful. But what she found is that as she looked for predictors of success or of future success in people, she started to look at kind of the normal things like talent, like luck, or we don't believe in luck, divine guidance or divine intervention and opportunity. She was looking at all these basic predictors of success and she found that it was something different. And we'll talk about that today. And the reason I bring grit up is because when I was looking at all of the failed kings, if you will, or all of the decent kings that ended up failing at some point, because Uzziah was called to a 52-year reign. It was 52, not 54, right? Okay, I think it's 52. If I'm wrong, I apologize. I'm only off by 2 years. Not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. 52-year reign. That is a long reign as a king. That was long in the grand scheme of kings in Israel and in Judah at the time. That is significant. And to manage leadership for that long of a time and not screw up significantly would have been difficult. In a lot of ways, I can identify with Uzziah. Yes, he was prideful. And yes, in post, it's easy to look at a king who goes into the temple when we have a high estimation of the temple service at the time and think, man, Uzziah, what the heck, bro? Why would you do that? And you'll notice this over the next week, it wasn't until Joash that they found the lost book of the law. I mean, not Joash, Josiah, that they found the lost book of the law. What does that tell me? It tells me that there's a significant period of time in Judah where there are things happening in and around the temple and at the locales with the priesthood, much of which is good, obviously ordained and designed by God, but a lot of it is probably ineffective. And Uzziah, who was very clearly an effective and efficient human being, they said that, they gave him that much, like looks at what's happening and says, I can fix this. Now that's pride to an extent where he stepped outside of the lane that God had for him. And then he stepped into a position where, yeah, he got leprosy. That's horrible. It stinks. It's frustrating, but I can still identify with what he chose to do. Because when you've seen success, it's easy for you to not calibrate and continue to feel like you could be successful. And so the reason I'm talking about grit is because when I look at specifically, Amaziah, I get equally confused with which ones it is, because there's Azariah or Uzziah. Second Kings calls him Azariah, and it sounds like the same thing as Uzziah. And then there was, anyways, there's just so much. But Amaziah, it says that he didn't do it with his whole heart. With Uzziah, he did it really well, but then failed. With Jotham, you got a good situation, but even he didn't remove the high places like some of the later kings did. Then you got Ahaz, who completely screwed up, unable to make an effective decision. He listens to somebody at one point, but then he goes back and kind of shifts his thought process. It is hard to over time be consistent and honor what God's called you to honor. And I see this throughout scripture, that it is a desire of God for us to be consistent and to have grit. If you look at Joshua, he says, when you go into the land of promise, be strong and courageous, be consistent, step forward, do what God's called you to do. And this is reiterated later in Joshua chapter 7, when you've got sin that happens in the camp and they are pushing through, and they're not going to let the sin be a part of the camp like Aaron did earlier on in the wilderness. You got Jesus. He says, take up your cross and follow me. And that's not an easy situation. When he preaches first to a large group of people, he preaches what we call the Beatitudes. He says, blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are those people in hard situations who persevere in those hard situations. People who are gritty in hard situations so that they can inherit or receive something from the Lord. Like, this is a value that our God has. Blessed are you when others persecute you, for they persecuted me first. And so in some way, through our difficulty in life, if we are resilient, we can come to a greater knowledge of who God actually is. That it's through our suffering that often God reveals to us who he is in his strength. When you look at Paul, he starts in the first missionary journey, and the first missionary journey ends in what we would all consider failure. Dude gets beat in a place called Lystra by a bunch of backwoods hicks who don't know the difference between the Greek and Roman gods. And they definitely don't know the name of a different God. They're backwoods, and then they beat him. And then Paul goes through and said, hey, it's with trial and suffering that we're going to accomplish what God has. And he comes back to Antioch, says the same thing, and is like, well, it's successful. Yeah, I almost got killed, but it was successful. That God desires us to have grit in our faith and resilience. This is what God wants. Here are a couple of scriptures that make that obvious. Paul says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. What is he saying? In difficulty, in hardship, in trial, I'm going to press forward because I am passionate and I'm going to persevere in something that is greater than myself. Paul says this again. He says, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. Anyone can tell me what book that comes from in the Bible? I can't remember the exact chapter. I think it's 13, but anyone could tell me what book that is. I'll give you like props. 2 Corinthians. Boom. All right. James says, be steadfast under trial. Actually, he says earlier in the text, and you guys know this one. And why am I blanking on it? Probably because I'm tired. He says, consider it joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, for it's the testing of your faith that produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect effect as you continue to persevere and push through it and have grit under various trials. 1 Corinthians 16:13 says, be watchful, stand firm in the faith. And he says something that I did act like men, be strong, resilient, be gritty. Like the Bible, if it teaches us anything, it is to stand firm. And Jesus says, remain in me, abide in me. It is to be so passionate in our faith toward God and in serving Jesus that we remain in it over time. That's grit. That's grit. Grit is the combo of passion and perseverance, according to Angela Duckworth. I'm pulling pretty much everything from her today. There's another book by Carol Dweck called Mindset that also is pretty influential for me. I can give you as many resources as you want, but both of those books are really helpful. In fact, I could give you a huge long list of books that all seem to understand the basic reality that if we're going to be successful in life, yeah, we're talented. Yeah, we get blessed. Yeah, our external circumstances help us out a bit. But if we can take our talent, put it to work over time, that's when we're actually going to find success. And I am not the best person to teach this because I sure don't live it the way that I would like to. But it's the combo of passion and perseverance. Here are a couple things I wanted to say about that. I want you to bump natural talent. I want you to like bump that, like push that aside. Cool, you got it. But I know a bunch of people with some great natural talent who spend all of their time saying, man, I used to. The image of Napoleon Dynamite with the uncle's like, man, I used to throw football over the mountains. That's what comes to my mind. Great, you had natural talent at one point. What'd you do with it? What'd you do with the natural talent? God gave you a certain amount of talent. Did you multiply it like he expects you to do? Because with just talent, all you are is a big ball of potential energy. And potential energy isn't helpful unless it's moved into something that is more kinetic and helpful. You've got to put it to work. I almost rolled the whole whiteboard I got in my office all the way over here this morning, but then I was like, that's too much work. So it was the potential illustration that I never actually put to work. But picture the whiteboard here. What is it? It's the whiteboard. What's the point of it? It's just a whiteboard. I got to grab a marker and I got to write on it for it to be effective and useful for anybody in the room. You got to put your talent to work. Bump natural talent. Otherwise, you're just going to say, I used to. I feel like that's me right now. I'll see you later, bro. He's got to get to work at 7. I feel like I'm that guy at this point. One guy walked up to me when I was in the gym. I went into the whatever they call it, the locker room. I went into the locker room and it was at an athletic club. So you know how that is. It's really awkward if you're not used to men walking around naked. So anyways, I'm walking in, I got my shirt off and this old man walks up to me naked. I'm trying to give you the full illustration. Walks up to me naked and I'm just slapping my stomach. And I had like a 6-pack at the time, no big deal. And so like I'm doing that and it sounds like muscle. And this old man naked looks at me. He said, man, I used to be able to do that. Just wait. And I'm sitting here like, that's me now. I'm looking at like Jake over here, Mr. Greek God, looking all fit and stuff. And I'm sitting here like, man, I used to be in shape. Cool, bunch of talent not put to work. But if you start putting effort into things, it can actually shift the entire framework of your life. And you can get back in shape. You can get where you want to be. Bump natural talent. Also, don't overestimate your recent performance measures. This is where Amaziah failed. I think it's Amaziah. Yes, Amaziah, right? This is where Amaziah failed. He beats the Edomites, and then he starts a fight with the king of Israel at the time. Like, that's not cool. Don't overestimate your recent performance. That's like me walking off the stage and say, yeah, it was good. I don't even have to study next week. And that's happened to me before. Y'all seen it. It's when the sermon sucks. And like, don't live that way. Great. You just graduated college. Great. You just did something cool. Calibrate it. Calibrate it. Don't overestimate your recent performance measures because all that's going to do is make you lazy in the future. Third thing, luck isn't a thing. Divine intervention is a thing. And some people find themselves in great external circumstances. And there is a factor that you can't control, the family you grew up in, the country you were born in. I get all that, but it's not a thing you can control. It's not a thing you can control. So stop trying to mess with uncontrollables and mess with yourself. Like, this is what God has given you. Put it to work. She says, passion is this. It's the same goal consistently over time. Think about those things. The same goal consistently over time. If you're changing all the time, that means that wouldn't be a thing you would call a passion. It would be an interest or a hobby. Passion is the same goal consistently over time. And perseverance is an effort toward completion. So she says grit is the combo of a goal consistently over time put to work until it's completed. That's grit. Do you have grit? All of us are three or below in grit. None of us are great in grit. I don't think most of us are good in grit. If anyone had a 5, I would think you were lying about it, unless like you just embody grit. Here are a couple things I put because I'm in a Jeff Foxworthy mode. You'll see this on Sunday because I've got kind of a set of points that are you might be if. You might lack grit if you spend more time dreaming than doing. Ha! Woo! That's me. That's me. I get it. I get it. You sit there and say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. But you never do even the basic thing that you probably should have done. At least you would have gotten that done. But you didn't get anything done. You got a bunch of plans now. You going to get them done? You spend more time dreaming than you are doing. Your idea of productivity is cleaning and then working. How many times you spend up cleaning your office or getting your inbox cleared, but then you start and then you're going to work? Well, why don't you work first and then clear your inbox as a celebration moment, right? Like what I do this all the time. So I'm not saying you suck. I suck too. I feel like at least cleaning my inbox in my email, at least that means I did something, but then I didn't do what I needed to do. You might lack grit if your idea of productivity is cleaning then working. You might lack grit if you're more frustrated about what people think than what you know. What people think about you than what you know about yourself. I can spend my entire week thinking about what other people think about me and trying to gauge my success and adjust my schedule based on their performance measures. Or I can look at myself, recognize what I know I've done, and then step into what I know I need to do, uncontingent on what people think, and actually be successful by the end of the week. Here's an example, and I keep using this because it's a huge portion of my work week. When I'm prepping a sermon, I could spend an hour on a sermon and come in here, and most of y'all probably wouldn't even know the difference. I probably could. So if I gauge my workflow based on what people think, then I'm not going to study. Because a lot of times people will come up to me after a sermon that I didn't prep as much as I thought I should have, and they'll say, that was great. Often God will work in spite of me, and I didn't do anything I should have, but it was like one of the better sermons. And so if I look at that last performance measure and gauge it based on people liking a sermon, then I'm not going to be diligent in the study that I should be. This is not me saying I don't study. I need you to hear this. I'm trying to be super vulnerable with you guys so that you can maybe connect on the things that you're allowing other people to dictate your schedule, when the reality is you need to choose to do what God's called you to do. And when you don't do it at the end of the day, you're going to feel less full, because no amount of you doing what other people want you to do is going to make you feel full. You might be filling their tank, but you're not filling yours. You might also lack grit if you think more about the barriers than you do the opportunities. Yesterday, I had a meeting with our creative team. He was at this meeting. So obviously I'm gonna be careful about how specific I am. But in that meeting, there are a couple things that as a group we throw out. And sometimes the first set of responses are why we can't, rather than recognizing we need to do this. There's always a reason you can't. And if I focus on what I can't, what that means is my passion either isn't great enough to drive past these barriers, or I'm not willing to persevere and put effort to overcome these barriers. You might lack grit if you think more about barriers than opportunities. I do this when people bring ideas to me. I just happen to be in a position here at the church where I'm the one that's kind of bringing direction to the teams that I lead. And so I see that from a different perspective. But when I was under different leaders, I would always put barriers. Pastor John comes up to me sometimes, he throws out some ideas. And if I'm not really careful and intentional about honoring that time, I can easily say, I don't know. I don't know if that's a good idea. And I'll do that. Why? Because I'm 34 and I think it should be one way. And he's 60 at this point and he thinks it should be another way. And there's a generational difference. So my first thought is barriers because of the difference in our generation. But I need to be better at that and have more grit, even in basic conversations. Because our passions are in the same direction, and I need to not see barriers. I need to see opportunities to honor him and to grow this organization. So I want to just put that on myself rather than just saying the creative team puts barriers up sometimes. We all do this. You might lack grit if you bring more problems than solutions. You might lack grit if you bring more problems than solutions. I think problem bringers and problem solvers are radically different in their mindset. Problem bringers think of the problem, don't want to put any effort to it, so they bring it to somebody else. Problem solvers think of a problem, probably just as much, if not more than a problem bringer, but then they solve a portion of them themselves, and then they bring it, just like first week, they bring it to a person when they need the help doing it. But I'd encourage you, Grit. Grit's a good thing. How do you develop grit? How do you develop grit? I said this earlier a little bit. Without effort, you're all potential. You're all shoulda, coulda, woulda. And those people are super annoying. I'm that way sometimes. So I recognize I'm anointing. Anointed. We're in a series called Anointed Annoyance. So there's that. And Angela Duckworth in her book, she says, effort counts 2 times, and she gives a basic formula. She said, skill is the exponential effect of talent times effort. Talent times effort. If you put work to your basic talents, that's where you get skill. She says, actual achievement and success is skill, once you've developed it, times effort. What she's trying to say with some scientific formula or whatever is that you got to put in a whole lot of work to be effective at something. You might have all the talent in the world, but if you don't put it to work, it's not going to help you. So what I would encourage you to develop grit this week is think of the things you're not putting as much effort as you want to toward, but you have some natural giftings in that area. That is my life in ministry. I think God has naturally gifted me to do some of the things in ministry, but my biggest hindrance is that I procrastinate, or that I feel like natural talent can compensate for effort. You know what that's gotten me? That's gotten me in a place of, not positionally, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in a place of less success than I should be. I've squandered some of the natural talent because I haven't put it to work and put a lot of effort toward it. Second thing you can do to develop grit, and this is what she says, you can gauge your interest. Gauge your interest. Because passion is the same goals over time. If you're not interested in something, you're going to change your major. Find what you are genuinely passionate about. Think about the things that you're already setting goals toward constantly. And maybe there's nothing. If there's nothing, figure something out. God has a purpose for you. For me, it is ministry in general. Consistently over time, I am passionate about developing systems, about communicating the gospel of Jesus through God's word. I am passionate. That has not changed. What is that for you? Because if you can gauge your interest level, you can start moving in the right direction. Second thing you need to do, you got to practice it. You got to practice it. Whatever it is, you got to practice it. This is practice for me. It's also performance, I guess, but this is practice for me. The reason I do this is selfless, because I want to help you all, but it also makes me better. This is a practice opportunity for me to develop in what God has made me passionate about. And what I said here is, I said, look at the checkpoint, not the finish line. A lot of the reasons we stop ahead of time is because we don't look in the right places. It's like if you're trying to climb a mountain, just look at the next space. Don't look at the top of the mountain. You'll get intimidated and stressed out. Start practicing. Take your next step. If you got a big paper to write your first paragraph. You got a big paper to write, at least get your bibliography done or get your sources out there. Just start in that direction and practice it. And then you'll realize, is it going to be successful? Maybe, maybe not. But if you enjoy practicing, if as you practice, you continue to be more and more interested and passionate about those things, that's where you start to realize it. The other thing I said, this comes directly from Simon Sinek. Y'all have heard about this. He writes this book called Start With Why. I put find your why. Find your why. Without a purpose, you're not going to do anything on purpose. You just won't. If you don't have a purpose. I mean, it was interesting when I left True Life Church, and I'm almost done, I promise. When I left True Life Church, this is back in 2017, I had 10 months transition. So I let them know that I was going to Elevation Church in December of 2016, and I stayed on till July of 2017. That's a long time. How did I continue to work? Well, because I know where my purpose is. My purpose wasn't in fulfilling the desires of an organization. My purpose is doing what God's called me to do, regardless of the organization I'm a part of. That enables me to be effective in what I'm doing, regardless of whether someone wants me to be there, whether I'm going elsewhere. What is your purpose? Find your why. And if your why is because somebody told you to do it, that's not your why, that's theirs. Find your why. That'll help you develop passions, and it'll definitely help you with perseverance. Because Paul would have quit after getting beat several times if he didn't have a purpose that was deeper and greater than what people thought, and some base level interest. He found his why. And then the last thing, hope. What are you hoping in? What are you hoping for? What are you going to do when you get to that level of success you want to get to? And then when you get there, you're going to find out that it wasn't worth it or that it was worth it. And I've got this thing called the Fisherman Paradox. You can jump out if you need to jump out. Totally get that. You can leave if you need to leave. But for those of you who stay, I'm going to talk about kind of this idea. I called it the Fisherman Paradox. I just saw something on TikTok recently, and I thought it was a really interesting way to think about things. So there's this fisherman. He's in Mexico. He goes out, grabs a couple of fish every single day, goes back, feeds his family with the fish, hangs out with his kids, and then goes and plays guitar with his buddies. That's what he does for a living. So some MBA from Harvard or something comes down to Mexico on a vacation one week, meets this fisherman, and says, man, you're pretty good at fishing. If you put some more effort toward this and tried to build it out, caught a few more fish every single day, you could scale this business and you could build something with it. You could maybe buy a couple boats and have like a fishing company. And then the guy who's doing the things he likes to do right now says, well, what will I do then? Well, then you could buy a few more boats. Then you could eventually get to the place where you own this entire fishing empire. And maybe you move to Mexico City. Maybe you move to, not Mexico City, it's fishing. Why would you move to Mexico City? Maybe you move to New York or somewhere else and become part of the stock exchange because your fishing business is so big. And the guy asks, what then? Well, then you earn so much on your stock that you're able to sell this business. And when you sell this business, you're going to make a whole lot of money on that business. And the guy says, cool, what then? Well, then you can go get yourself a nice little place on the beach. You can hang out. You can go catch a couple of fish every single day. You can sign a couple checks, and then you can hang out with your wife and kids, enjoy your life. You can go play guitar with your friends as a hobby, and then go to bed at night and feel relaxed. It's kind of a paradox because he was doing what ultimately he would want to do, but he's going through a whole lot of effort to get to that place. And so the beauty of that paradox is you could be happy doing absolutely nothing with the talent that you have. And in the end, the outcome, if it's not appealing to you, is not going to get you where you want to. I mean, like you might get there, but if the outcome is not appealing, you're not going to get there at the level you need to. But the beauty of going through that whole process, if you feel so led, is that when you get back on the beach at the end of your life, you feel different. You understand life differently. You've learned a lot of lessons. You have more wisdom that you can share with your kids. You have all of these things that you wouldn't have gained. And while the beginning and the end might look similar, when you add effort to the talent you naturally have, God can use it not just to bless other people, but to get you into a different way of thinking. So the reason I share that is because you've got to develop not just a why for doing things, but a future hope or expectation of what you hope the life you plan to live is going to produce. For us as Christians, we believe that's heaven. We believe it's eternity with Christ Jesus. We believe that it blesses people. We believe that the alternative is hell, or we believe that the alternative is a life lesser lived. Whatever it is for you, you got to find it and you got to look forward to it. This is what Jesus did and why he died on the cross. He says, because of the hope set before, or the joy set before him, this is the hope he had. He endured the cross. What are you going to do? Sorry, I went longer. I did give you an out if you didn't need to. Coop, will you pray for us to close? Amen. You are dismissed. Thank you, guys. Hey, last week, push hard, guys, girls.
You got something about doing something next week.
Doing something. Sorry, let me look at my my drive. Oh, so in this document, it's a leadership action step, right?
Yeah, something.
So let me give clarity for anyone who's here right now. Leadership action step. I'd love for you to list that in there. This specific step, I was talking to Frank about this recently. It might not be church oriented. So like, is Frank still there? No, I'm not going to share it then. But like, there's something at his organization that he's been praying about and thinking about. And I said, that might be your action step to pursue that. It doesn't have to be here. I know it makes it, oh yeah, do something here at the church. I don't know. Whatever it is for you, what is the next action step the Lord's driving you to? And I'm going to write one in too. I've got a lot that I'm looking for, so I need to narrow that down. The other thing is the survey of the intensive. So
Action step. That was the thing.
specific leadership step. So what am I going to do? This isn't, I want to be better at this. This is, I'm going to do this. So what is your, it might be, I'm going to lead a life group. It might be, I want to join a team so that I can eventually develop as a leader in that team. This is just church stuff. It might be, I'm going to get a group of people together at my work and we're going to start praying. It might be, I have a promotion opportunity that I wasn't going to apply for because I'm scared of the idea of being a manager at my workplace. Well, maybe you just apply and see what happens. That might be an action step for you, whatever that is. It might be, I am scared to talk to specific people and network with them so that I might get a job in the next couple of months. Maybe the action step is to go talk directly to people. I don't know what it might be. Maybe it's to ask someone who is a good leader to be a mentor. He did that for me a couple of weeks ago. Whatever action step it is for you, it doesn't have to be church oriented. I want it to just be effective and helpful for you. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Cool. Thank you guys so much. Great job. And sorry about the theological quandaries I presented.